Okay, we've got 3 judges. We have got Justice Abrahams. She's from New South Wales, so sometimes they pull in judges from different jurisdictions to help out the ACT. She's famous for a couple of cases. She presided over the recent Bruce Lehrman costs appeal case and allowed him to appeal the costs order, I think. In a way, maybe she's really brave. So maybe, I don't know. And she also, when David gave the material to the media and then the ABC was raided, and the ABC took that to court and said that the warrant wasn't valid, Justice Abraham said, yes, it was, and allowed that material and evidence that was seized to be used. So, and she's also already got a point of view on what official duty is, what David's official duty is. So that's the big argument of the day. The conviction appeal is whether or not David was acting in his official duty. We say he had a couple of duties. He took an oath as a soldier to serve the Australian public interest. I don't think there's anybody in Australia that would say, oh, I thought it was to serve the king, or I thought it meant just to obey your leader. I don't think anyone in Australia shares the opinion of Judge Mossop. So we're hoping that we'll get some common sense in the Court of Appeal. But he also, of course, as I've mentioned, had a duty as a lawyer to report criminal conduct. Otherwise, he could get struck off. He could be charged with concealing a serious offence. So he had a couple of duties, and we say it was in his official duty, in the public interest, to blow the whistle and to give that material to the media.
As a lawyer.
And as a lawyer as well. He had a duty, he had a legislated mandatory duty to do that as well. So, yeah.
Well, I think the Nazi generals at Nuremberg would have been very happy to have him hearing their case, because consistent with his decision on David, they would have all been acquitted and walked free.
How can it be a crime to report a crime? That's been David's kind of one-liner. How can it be a crime to report a crime? But that is the law at the moment that needs to be overturned.
I think we have a brave soul here who wants to ask a question. Do we?
Oh, thank you. Great question, Jakey. So Jakey's been staying with some friends up in the north coast of New South Wales.
At a secret location. We're not going to talk about that tonight.
No. Mullumbimby. And he's fit as a fiddle. Oh, he's been on a diet because Dave, of course, used to just feed him bacon and whatever.
I've personally seen him feed him battered fish.
Bad food.
I gave him pizza.
Yeah.
Jakey prosciutto, he loved it.
Yeah. But Jakey is a lean, mean fighting machine right now. He's so fit. I babysit him every now and then to give respite, because they need respite.
Well, I'm not going up to your place.
And what I've realised is okay, it's like a mutual obligation thing with him and Jake, because you kind of they both need each other,
Well, I think
Jake really needs a lot of assistance too.
David's looking like a lean, mean fighting machine too, because I think he spends most of his day in the gym.
In the gym, 6 hours some days. He's rowing every morning, 20 Ks. He's boxing, he's running, he's got a little tan. He
looked really good the last time I saw him.
He's probably fitter than he's ever been. Yeah, because that's been how he's looked after his mental health and his exercise. Awesome radio station. I forgot Scott. Yeah, that's it.
What would happen with this sort of case if we got a majority of independents in Parliament?
Great question. So I think Pocock and Wilkie recently introduced a whistleblower protection authority in the lower house. Wilkie has tried to introduce that. They have been really vocal about protecting whistleblowers, but as anything, we really need to pay attention to the detail. So being a lawyer, and this is what I do in my spare time, I read the bill the other day because it was finally published. And I think a Whistleblower Protection Authority is going to be an amazing support group for whistleblowers if it's enacted. But our kind of position is that you need to fix the whistleblower laws first. And unfortunately, the Whistleblower Protection Authority bill that the independents are campaigning on does not protect whistleblowers. So, for example, David McBride and Richard Boyle would not be eligible for support under the Whistleblower Protection Authority. They're probably the two most high-profile whistleblowers in Australia. Those two are not eligible, so they would be afforded no support. They're not eligible. You have to be an eligible person. Richard's not eligible because he's not eligible under the PIT Act, the Public Interest Disclosure Act, because your preparatory acts are not protected. So gathering of the evidence. Same with David. His gathering of the evidence would still be a criminal offence. But also for David, because he's whistleblowing on national security matters, he's not covered by the PIT Act. So the PIT Act has never worked. No one's ever been protected. It's been there 11 years and no one's ever got any protection from it. It's completely flawed. And I have a bit of a concern that if there's a lot of attention on this Whistleblower Protection Authority, that the attention will be drawn away from the real issue, and then Dreyfus can say, yay, win, because they were always committing. They were always going to have a Whistleblower Protection Authority. And I think the name is a bit misleading. It doesn't actually, it's not an authority. It's a group of people, a CEO, a commissioner, 2 deputy commissioners, heavily stacked.
There's a lot of jobs for mates.
A lot of jobs for mates in there. You can just imagine, you know, it's not, there's no whistleblowers there, you know.
It's sounding like the knack, actually.
Yeah. that's kind of how I see it. But by the time it gets, you know, if it passes, it's going to get watered down anyway from that. So I don't think it's going to be, I don't think it's an effective thing for us to be campaigning on. I think we really need to be campaigning on fixing the PIT Act. So Richard Boyles of the world and David McBride, who's whistleblowing on the most important information that our community needs to know, that needs to be fixed before we run off and do an authority. You boys have a...
Definitely. I didn't qualify for the PIT Act. My employer was a not-for-profit gambling lobby group, so there was no coverage for me anywhere in there. So, and they made some fairly significant commentary on that. Bad luck, I can call myself what I want, but they don't give a stuff. And they'll keep going, hard until I hope they've got you in the ground where they want you, and then set an example. It's all about set an example, put someone in prison. They tried to get me in for criminal contempt on a private prosecution, which has never been executed in New South Wales, but they'll do what they can to shut you up, move the attention off them. So, we've got to get the nuts and bolts right, and it's far from home.
But, Troy, Mark Dreyfus reckons there's nothing wrong with the current whistleblower laws.
It's a rule of law, Jeff.
They're working really well from the government's point of view. We've pretty much killed off any potential whistleblowers and killed any dissent.
Jeff, I'd answer that, but I've got to go to Israel. Bye-bye.
So could you say that it's really a protection from whistleblowers then?
Yeah. There was a cartoon like that where
like everything, opposite. Knack, opposite.
Yeah.
Everything's the opposite. We're in an opposite world. This is dystopia.
Kathy Wilcox did a cartoon in the Fairfax media where she pointed out that I don't think whistleblower protection means what you think it means, because Mark Dreyfus, or at least the Albanese government, seem to think it means protection from whistleblowers, because let me tell you, the public sector whistleblowers I think are even worse off than the private sector, because they have to make their disclosure in a certain way. All that does is paint a target on their back. It then goes off to somebody that refers it back to the department that they've complained about.
Yeah, but first, if you don't get the right person in the organisation to complain to, they knock it back as well.
Oh, well, sorry, you're
Technical
not...
knockouts everywhere, all through the Act.
Yeah, TKO, you're not covered. But the department that you're trying to report then determines that nothing's happened, and the independent ombudsman accepts that. So the net result is you've just exposed yourself. The next thing that happens after that is you're normally made redundant, which has absolutely nothing to do with you trying to blow the whistle.
So really, Jeff, when you're saying that it's the politicians and the parties that have got the problem, it's really the public service.
Well, it's both. It's both. They work hand in glove.
But where do whistleblowers come from, and who needs protecting?
Well, look, I think whistleblowers are becoming an increasingly rare breed, because actually things have been getting worse, not better, and in the private sector as well. I mean, Dreyfus's whistleblowing laws in action. It's quite staggering. Just this week, I got a call from a distressed whistleblower in Western Australia. He was in the federal court. He'd spent $500,000 on legal fees, and he'd given all of his evidence. This company has done terrible things, most of which will be suppressed because it's commercial in confidence. And he can't understand why the judge just found against him. So that whistleblowing disclosure has died. He's now left $500,000 out of pocket. And the company is disputing that he's actually a whistleblower. So they're going after him for costs as well. So why on earth would you be a whistleblower in this environment?
Can you blow the whistle on who that is?
His name is Christian Reich. It's a matter of public record. Ken Quinlan, the fellow I referred to earlier in Queensland, Kent's taken on the Shell Oil Company. Kent currently has on the slate $3 million in legal fees, right? And they're basically sitting around waiting for him to die of cancer. They're dragging it out, delaying it. That's what they do. They are that low that that's what companies will do. And there's the outstanding case is a woman called Sharon Kelsey, who had a duty as the CEO of a council in Queensland to report the corruption she saw to I think in Queensland they don't call it the Anti-Corruption Commission, I think they call it the Corruption Commission, which possibly, they're taking the piss or it's a bit of a clue, I don't know. But anyway, the Corruption Commission actually found that the mayor was corrupt and then let him off with a warning. Meanwhile, Sharon Kelsey spent $4 million on legal fees with no recompense, and she's lost everything. So the private sector, it's not working either, but Mark Dreyfus thinks it's working great. So I don't know what conclusion you draw from that.
Maybe I can take Mark with me to my treatment next Wednesday, my 47th round of chemo, see how he likes that. There's no uplift in any of this. So.
Except we can all sleep with a clear conscience at night. And what is so beautiful about David McBride's case is that it's not legally aided. I've got two amazing barristers. We're all just doing it on, what is that saying? Smell of
pro bono
rag or whatever. Yeah.
Smell of an naughty rag.
And but people have consciously put their hands in their pocket and donated. This isn't just money that's come from the government through legal aid. It's not the Commonwealth spending $3 million on the prosecution. These are really good Australians that stand by, and we're up to like $200,000. I think that's incredible, and it just makes this case feel full of integrity for me. Full of integrity.
Australians have had a gutful of these two parties. It's time we dilute them and put them where they need to be in the background.
Well, it is incredible, Eddie, and the people have always been for David McBride, and I think as time goes on, as this battle continues, and it will, it'll go to the High Court and beyond if it has to. The people power will eventually win, because David is the line that we can't allow them to cross. The thieves and liars have had control of this country for too long, and everybody knows it. Now, most people are prepared to walk past it, but more and more people are stopping and looking and saying, "Ugh, I don't like the look of that." So we will win this fight, but it may take a long time. It always does. I mean, my battle took 9 years until we got to the Royal Commission. That was 9 years of the bank smearing me on the back channel, whispering in politicians' ears, briefing journalists against me with pure lies. It's not an easy road. Dave's fighting the federal government, who are throwing everything but the kitchen sink at him, and they make the rules. They can float this national security concept, just come in, take all his evidence out of court. They're prosecuting him, and yet they can just take his evidence and leave him with nothing, and then call that show trial a trial and say, as I heard, and I felt sick to my stomach as she said this, I heard the Commonwealth prosecutor say to the judge, "Oh, well, he's pleaded guilty." well, when you steal all this evidence, he didn't have a lot of choice. But look, it is the people that have stood by David and will continue to do that, and will be there to the end. But look, I can't end without saying something about Eddie. I mean, Eddie took over a case that had been, well, let's just be polite and say she's taken over after David was convicted and thrown into prison with other lawyers representing him. Eddie came in at that point and took over what looked like a lost cause, and nobody has given more in terms of her own time and effort than Eddie, and the amount of time she's put into this case. Eddie is single-handedly, normally there's a team of several solicitors at least. Big firm, it would be a dozen solicitors working on this. Eddie's done it all on her own. She's found the counsel, she's briefed them, held the whole show together, and does 2 lengthy conferences with David McBride every week.
I think every single person in this room, if you were a lawyer, would do the same thing, because it's so important,
And Eddie's always been prepared to do it all for nothing if there's no money there to pay her at the end of the day. So I've got to say, in my experience of dealing with lawyers, which hasn't always been a happy one, Eddie is unique in my experience, and I think we do owe her a tribute tonight.
Still confused why lawyers were using sanitizer on their counters during COVID. I made some comments to a previous solicitor known to most of us in the room here, and I said, you need to replace that with lubricant, because that's how it feels when you're being
Well, Troy's another whistleblower who has had experience of a law firm. In fact, I think you were using the same lawyers as David there for a while, and that cost you your house, didn't it, Troy?
Yeah, 1.4 million.
So how does Dreyfus think this system's working great when whistleblowers have got to spend millions of dollars to defend the truth, and if as seems to quite often happen with these judges, they come up with these tortuous decisions to decide that the whistleblower's wrong, you lose everything. I mean, it's got me beat. But
And then when the subject of compensation comes up with whistleblowers, which is exactly what needs to happen, in America they've got that, a big fund, a big pool of money that when people blow the whistle and they've secured convictions and things like that, they give money to the whistleblower who has lost everything. Yeah. But in Australia we don't have that, and as I understand, that's not in the plan either for those people who are
but the politicians can buy.
Everyone else is going to make money out of the whistleblower.
Well, you shouldn't have said that, Eddie. You really shouldn't have said that, because you've set me off now. I know I've been holding back up to this point, but I can't take it any longer. You bring me to the subject of the parasites that hang off whistleblowers' coattails. And we all need to be conscious of this, that this is something that I guess really gets to me. The number of people who want to attach themselves. Nobody in this room, I know everybody in this room is a genuine supporter, but there are people, academics and other people who attach themselves to whistleblowers to further their own careers and further their own interests. And this is what makes me really angry, are people who are using whistleblowers for their own purposes. And I probably shouldn't say any more than that, but we know this is the thing, that amidst all of this, there's this titanic struggle between good and evil going on. There are these opportunists who come in and are seeking to feather their own nest out of it and profit from. I mean, David McBride's done 10 months in prison. I just can't begin to imagine how hard that's been for him. And yet there are academics. They live in law schools. They've never been out in the real world and earned a living. But these people comment on David's case as if, and on whistleblowers generally, as if they have the first idea of what's going on. And one of them even said that David's prison isn't a bad prison, it's okay. And like, what would you know? And these people do us a lot of damage because the media, who don't know any better, quote these people as experts. So, yeah, I'm sorry, but you just set me off there. You hold that in.
Question in the back.
It's Dave's school friend.
Yeah.
G'day.
Could you define national interest for me? and
Can I be the Attorney General when I define it?
Sorry, we don't talk about that. We just march in and take it, and that's it.
And is there any international agreement, seeing it's occurred overseas, most of the offences occurred overseas, are there any international agreements that Australia has signed that we are breaking by doing what we've done in Australia?
What we've done in terms of
Legally against David, so an international agreement rather than Australian law.
Yeah.
Things we've signed, the Australian government has signed international. So
You did a law degree, didn't you, Jeff?
I graduated 40 years ago, Eddie, and I never practiced, so I'll defer to you. But look, everybody knows that international law is practiced more in theory than fact. And yes, the short answer to your question is you're quite right, yes. I mean, the Australian Defence Force, or the leadership of the Australian Defence Force, the generals, are squarely in the frame for those war crimes in Afghanistan, because the test is not, I mean, they've all said, and General Brereton, who conducted the Brereton Review that exonerated the generals, which, by the way, has since been, to be polite, expectorated all over by a group of experts who reviewed it. And that's something that Miles rushed that report out like a day before Christmas
It came out just before David's trial started, and they released it on the day of his sentence. It was completely validating of David McBride's complaint.
Yeah, and it completely repudiated the Brereton report. See, Brereton found in his report that the generals didn't know about the war crimes, which was, General Brereton found that the generals didn't know. I think, so... But
Which is very strange, because that principle you're talking about is the Yamashita principle from, do you know all about Yamashita? You can tell that story? And it's law. It's law. It's Australian law, it's international law.
Well, General Brereton doesn't seem to know much about what you're talking about either, because he found that the generals didn't know. Now, the test for the International Criminal Court is not whether they knew, it's whether they ought to have known. Now, blind Freddie would think they ought to have known. In fact, I believe they did know. And as Eddie's saying, this goes back to what they call the Yamashita principle, which came out of the post-Second World War trials of war criminals, like the Japanese equivalent of, obviously he wasn't German, he wasn't in Nuremberg. Yamashita was a general in the Pacific War who was responsible for numerous war crimes against Australian and British troops in Malaysia and Singapore, the 8th Division, 8th Australian Division, many of whom were murdered directly or by malnutrition and neglect in the infamous Changi prison camp. Yamashita was involved in that. And having covered himself in glory there, he went to the Philippines. He also was there. There was this thing called the Bataan Death March, where many Americans died. And Yamashita's defence was that he didn't know. And this is the principle Eddie's talking about, the Yamashita principle. They said, bad luck, mate. You ought to have known. You were a lieutenant general, you're a senior officer. That's not good enough. Basically, they didn't believe him, but they said, no, you ought to have known. And he was convicted.
David was, he was taught this case in military law school. He taught this case to other legal officers i.e. if someone above you is doing something wrong, you can't be a bystander. So he was following exactly what he was taught.
But as with all these things, like you might think we had a banking royal commission. Well, let me tell you, that was bread and circuses to keep the peasants happy. They deliberately didn't scratch the surface. Now, I spent 9 years of my life getting that royal commission. Maybe ask yourselves why I wasn't called as a witness. Yeah, I mean, they don't want to find the truth most of the time, and you're absolutely right. Under international law, they should be looking at what happened in Afghanistan. They should be saying, you guys ought to have known. But here's the little subtlety, as I say, like with the Royal Commission, this is where it gets muddied. The International Criminal Court will generally say, oh, well, we'll look at it if there hasn't been an inquiry by the country concerned. That's why they had the Brereton report. They're going to hold that, excuse my French, crock of shit up and say, oh, we've looked at that, nothing to see here. And let me tell you now, the International Criminal Court will accept it. The International Criminal Court is a joke.
So some cynical people think that the Brereton inquiry was set up in the way it was as an inquisitorial inquiry because any of the evidence that was compelled in that inquiry cannot be used to do a criminal prosecution. So the Office of Special Investigator, which was set up as part of the Brereton inquiry, is set up to quarantine the evidence coming out of the Brereton inquiry, what was compelled, what wasn't, because you can only share certain evidence with the AFPs, evidence that wasn't compelled. So years and years down the track we are with the OSI, and we've had one arrest, one murder charge, Oliver Schultz, who's currently battling out contested committal in the local court, 12, 14 years after the alleged incident. One person, and I don't believe that came from the Office of Special Investigator. I believe that came from the helmet cam footage on the Mark Willesee program when it was aired, and everyone saw the disabled Wheatfield, Afghanistan man be shot to death.
Yeah, well, it's a bit like the footage that we all saw. I'm sure we've all seen the excellent film in relation to Julian Assange, where you can see the American helicopter gunship where the crew are laughing as they're gunning down people who are plainly civilians. And of course, the interesting thing is nobody's been charged over that. Nobody's been charged over any of the war crimes that Julian Assange exposed. So they delay and obfuscate this, and I can tell you now, I think the whole system, the Brereton report, everything's been designed to delay, and nobody will be convicted of these war crimes. And that's, as I said, that's the way it works. The Banking Royal Commission, bit of theatre, made it look like they were doing something. Essentially, most of the recommendations were never implemented anyway. This is the way the system works, and that's what we're up against, the system. But mentioning Julian Assange, I'm sure everybody's seen John Shipton here.
And he's up next.
And that reminds me, this is a key thing to remember, is these battles, these aren't battles, these are campaigns. They go on for a long time. So we have to be prepared to stay the course.
Not giving up. Dave has been on this journey for 12 years.
Thanks, mate.
So we're all joining him in the latter part of his journey, and we have to stand by him and continue until we get victory.
Has David ever told you, Eddie? I just want to tell one little anecdote before we go. David apparently, I think, might have been when he got back from Spain, he looked on the telly and there was this bloke, Jeff Morris, on the TV talking about we need a Royal Commission into the banks. And David laughed and he said, oh, you're on drugs, mate. You'll never get that Royal Commission.